Looks like you're purpling.
Is it live?
Yeah, we're live.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for tuning in to our first live stream from the field in Colorado. Word of warning, this is very much an experiment. We've never done this before in Colorado before, so there may be some hiccups along the way. There may be some issues. We may fall flat on our face, but you're gonna have to bear with us. I'm Andrew Closter. I'm our Colorado field advocate here in Colorado, and I'm a certified optical gas imaging thermographer, which is a word salad that essentially means I'm trained to use one of these doodads. This is an optical gas imaging camera. It's a specially designed IR camera that allows us to see pollutants from oil and gas that are otherwise invisible to our eyes. And these pollutants that we're looking for are planet-warming pollutants like methane, and then other volatile organic compounds that are emitted from oil and gas infrastructure, including things like benzene, which is a known carcinogen. Standing here with me is Carol, who lives in Ault, and right now we are standing about 2 miles east of Ault, and Ault is a small farming community in Weld County, roughly 75, 80 miles north of Denver, just for those folks joining who may not have a sense of Colorado geography. So we're near the Wyoming border, and we're really kind of in the heart of the primary oil and gas extraction basin in Colorado's Front Range. Carol has lived in this community for a few years, and she's joining today to give some context, because what you probably are having a hard time seeing on the live stream is the oil and gas facility that we're looking at. It's beyond this cow pasture here, and I don't know how it's showing up on the stream, but you're probably just barely seeing maybe some outline of some infrastructure back there. This is a site called Topaz. It's a multi-well pad owned by the operator Bayswater. We've been monitoring it for a little over a year because Carol requested that we come out and start monitoring this facility. And then there's also one which you cannot see. It's in front of us, and it's across another farm field even further away called Ruby. Both of these are facilities that were just drilled and fracked in the last year and just really started producing oil and gas in the last couple of months. And Carol can share a little bit about this, but Ault in the last few years has just sort of been besieged by new oil and gas drilling and fracking, and that's really what woke her up to what she was living next to, and ultimately had her reach out to us. But I'm gonna hand things over to her, and just word of warning, I'm gonna be kind of distractedly looking through the camera while we talk. If I see something super dramatic, I'm gonna potentially cut Carol off just momentarily so I can show it to you all through the camera. Other than that, I'm going to let her kind of share some context for why we're here, why we're concerned about these sites, why she's concerned about these sites.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, I'm Carol. I'm a new resident of Ault. I moved here 6 years ago. Matter of fact, I bought my house in Ault this month, so it's the 6th anniversary. I love my home. It's a charming little quaint bungalow, 14 miles east of Fort Collins. My original plan was to move to Fort Collins, but I quickly realized I couldn't afford to live in Fort Collins. And I was living in Maine at the time, as you can tell by the hat. I had been taking care of my partner, David, who died earlier that year that I bought this house from Alzheimer's. So I was pretty burned out and not in a good place to make good sound decisions when I decided to move back to Colorado. I grew up in Ohio, but my family has been in Colorado since the early 70s. My youngest daughter was born here. So this has been home base in Colorado for my extended family. So when my partner died, I wanted to come and be near my family. But I couldn't come and look at housing. I was too tied up in caretaking and settling the estate. So I did what a lot of people are doing now, and I perused Zulu and Realtor.com, and I found my home in Ault, and I thought it was an answer to a prayer. And my daughter came out and looked at it, her husband, my grandson, and everybody gave me the thumbs up. Mom, this is the house for you. So I was so pleased when I moved here. Shortly thereafter, and remember, I bought this house sight unseen, just saw pictures and going on the observations and the videos my daughter had sent me. I had lived here not even a year, and I had received a forced pooling notice. Now, I'm not going to dive into the weeds about what a forced pooling notice is, because that's not why I'm here. I'm here to talk about citizen impact. But all I can say, I opened that letter from PDC's attorney and said, what the heck is going on? I didn't even know what they were talking about. But I knew they were talking about fracking. I knew they were talking about taking away my mineral rights. I knew they wanted to drill under my home without my permission, and everyone on my block got the first pooling notice. So I had retired. I taught English, college level English for 20 years. And I came here to retire and heal and rest. And I immediately had to put on my boxing gloves again and enter the fight. And the fight is against fracking. So I reached out to all the environmental groups that I could contact online. First, I want to make sure you know that if you are faced with a fracking situation, do not hesitate to reach out to some of these marvelous environmental groups that are fighting for us to end the frack. Colorado Rising, 350 Colorado. Earthworks wasn't the first place I called, but I learned about Earthworks later on through a webinar, and I saw Andrew's work, and I knew I had to get his camera out here to this site. So anyway, I protested that forced pooling notice. This was back in 2018. And PDC, it's PDC Energy, which is now owned by Chevron. Chevron is looking to fatten their portfolio in Colorado. So all of you people out there who thinks Colorado in the Front Range is a great place to live, warning, nobody warned me about fracking. And this is a point I want to make. I bought my house sight unseen. I had trusted relatives look at it. I had a trusted realtor. Nobody mentioned fracking. In their defense, I can say fracking wasn't at 60 plus wells in Alt at the time I bought my house, but Greeley and Weld County, it's W-E-L-D, but we call it Weld County, W-E-L-L-E-D. And I learned that from these environmentalists who gave me a quick education on fracking and what I need to do to protest these wells and what I can do if I choose to get involved. So PDC withdrew their app. We didn't win that protest. And by the way, I had a wonderful environmental lawyer from Boulder, Kate Merlin, who helped me pro bono to file that complaint. You file in Colorado, if you want to protest a well, you file with the COGCC acronym. What is it, guys? It's tell me COGCC.
Well,
Colorado
it was
Oil and Gas
Conservation Commission. That was previous. Now it is the Energy and Carbon Management Commission.
Oh,
so the acronym is ECMC now.
Oh boy.
As of July this year. So
there'll always be COGCC. But I got things to say about that too, and our governor. But I'll get to that. When I reached out to these eight, I was so impressed. I didn't know a soul other than my own family that lived here. And they were so gracious, so kind, so unrelenting in helping me. And Kate Merlin helped me. Now listen, I'm a pretty literate individual. I taught literacy for 20 years. But I couldn't fill out the I'm going to call it the COGCC. I couldn't fill out that form that I had to file to protest that. I wasn't literate enough, or they make it complicated enough, where the average citizen doesn't know what to do. So that's my first introduction to fracking. Let me tell you a little bit about my second encounter with fracking. And I think what I want you to gain from that first story is not just a little knowledge about forced pooling and the COGCC and the wonderful nonprofits and organizations that are fighting fracking and the wonderful people I've met in this movement to fight the fracking. But fracking has become so normalized in Colorado that they can put, and they did, PDC can throw up a huge well across from the dump on Route 14, which is the road between Alt and Fort Collins, emitting white smoke. You don't need that camera to see some of the emissions that were coming off of that site. And people were just driving by like it's another day. And nobody, when I talked to my neighbors about the forced pooling, they just poo-pooed it. Now, it could be a lot of my neighbors are in the oil and gas industry. I live in a lower income, working class neighborhood. Remember, I said I couldn't afford Fort Collins. Alt. And plus, I like rural communities. I don't want to be in a congested community. So, normalization of fracking, force pooling, COGCC, PDC energy for starters. One day, I went to Fort Collins to do my grocery shopping. It's only 14 miles away. And I came back on Route 14. Everything you want to know that's wrong with Colorado can be found on Route 14 between Bald and Fort Collins. Yeah, I'm going to have to read that. That's my articles. Everything that's wrong with the state can be found on Route 14. I won't go into details, but fracking is what I'm here to talk about. One day I'm coming in on Route 14 into Alton, and there's a huge rig. You can see one behind. I'm looking right at a drilling rig right now. In the center of town, next to the schoolyard, Highland School, no more than 500 feet from the school. I thought, what the heck is going on? I came home, I picked up the phone, I started at the local level. I called the town of Alton town office, and I will call the person I talked to, the kind of a pseudo town manager. I said, what's with the drill at the school, right in the center of town? What drill? What drill? The giant 3-story red, white, and blue with the American flag.
The skyline of the town of Alton.
Yeah, I mean, you can't miss it. She goes, oh, they're probably drilling for water. I thought, who does she think she's talking? They ain't drilling for water. So I went from the local level to the county level. I called Weld County. Now, this is my impression. You can fact check me. There's an oil and gas division in Weld County. Weld County is the capital of oil and gas development, I would say, in Colorado, particularly along the Front Range. That's why they call it Weld County. I'm verbing it. All right, so I called Weld County. I talked to the director of the oil and gas division, and I posed the same question. What is with a drilling rig within 500 feet of the school? And I already read about Bella Romero over in Greeley, where they've got a huge pad right next to the playground. Tragic, morally wrong. And I thought, they're doing it now in Alt? You know what he told me? That permit is grandfathered in. I said, Senate Bill 181, health impacts, with everything we have learned since that grandfathered permit, and you're just going to roll over and let this happen? That's exactly what they did. I was the pain, not the driller. So I learned not to trust my county government. Here's another little caveat. They're funded by the oil and gas industry. Now, what kind of corruption is that? So that's the first place where permits get approved. It's on the county level, and then it goes on to the state. So I lost that battle. So I threw myself into work with 350 Colorado. They have a fracking committee. And I started showing up for their, it was COVID, we had to do everything on Zoom. That's where I learned about Andrew's work and other fine people doing good work in this area. And Kate Christensen of 350 Colorado, she's not with them anymore, but she was the chair of the fracking committee. And she taught me the ins and outs of how to file a protest against permits that are going to be going before the state. And I will pause there for a minute and let you take that in while we wave at this passerby.
While you pause there,
Yes.
you're already disrupting your flow.
Oh,
I want to bring, so Ed Earthworks for charmingly low tech, even though we use $100,000 cameras, and we don't have any ability to zoom in for you all on the live stream. So we are going to show you what the camera sees by trying to put the two lenses of the cameras, the phone camera and the camera together, and hopefully you get a decent enough image. And I'll explain what we're seeing right now. Okay.
you can't see this with the naked
It's
eye.
going to be a little, I need to focus. Bear with us, folks. And if you get motion sick, maybe just close your eyes for a second. All right, we're good. So it's you're going to see a kind of psychedelic display of colors. What we're looking at, you'll notice a tiny, what looks like a little almost like a little flame at the top of a wall. We're looking at a sound barrier around a compressor. So this site has an active compressor running right now. Compressors are used to do as they sort of say. I mean, they compress gas to help it travel through a line. So this is a well pad that we're looking at. This compressor on site is essentially helping move that gas off of site once that gas comes up from the formation. Don't pay any attention to the actual thing that looks like a little flickering flame. That is heat from the exhaust of the compressor. The thing that I want you to see, and hopefully you're getting some visual of it as we're looking at this, is what looks like some pluming kind of purplish, maybe clouds. That the exhaust of the compressor is the actual emission. So any combusted source such as a compressor or a flare, if they're not fully efficient at burning off methane, what you're going to get in the form of a plume is the methane, the hydrocarbons, the volatile organic compounds that are not combusted, pluming off of these combusted sources. So you may or may not be seeing it right now, pluming off. It depends on the direction of the wind. But I just wanted to draw attention to this, and I'm going to keep an eye as Carol talks on the site and potentially bring other things to your attention. I'll also later on in the stream walk through this site a little bit more so you can understand what it is that we look for when we're looking for emissions. But we're going to return to Carol.
Thank you, Andrew. And this is the site I protested with the COGCC. Kate Christensen from 350 Colorado helped me file that protest. She also showed up at the protest before the COGCC. Everything was done on Zoom then. Bayswater, this site and that site. So let me tell you what Bayswater had to say at the COGCC permit committee. We only do best practices. Our top concern is environmental destruction of any kind. We have the most modern, up-to-date, efficient equipment. And with Colorado's rigid regulations, we will adhere to whatever the state requires of us, not to pollute this environment. Well, first of all, that's all baloney. Sorry. I knew that would happen.
Expletives are okay.
As I get worked up about fracking, that may happen again, especially when it comes to this site. So I wanted to protest this permit before this monstrosity of the one behind the camera were drilled. They gave me, 2 minutes before the COGCC to tell my story. And then when I ran over and they said, we'll give you an extra 30 seconds, they acted like they were doing me a favor. My point, they don't care about citizens. I was there to give a citizen impact statement, and they blew me off. Bayswater had I stayed for the Bayswater testimony. They went on and on and on, and the COGCC was engaged and asking. When I spoke, they were going to the copying machine, they were looking for their water bottle, they were fumbling through their papers. Who knows what they were doing? I got 2 words for the COGCC. Clown show. Clown show. I was horrified. I came to Colorado thinking, I'm a Democrat. I'm just going to say it. I'm a social Democrat. Yes, I supported Bernie. But here we are. And I guess I was under a false impression that if we only have a 2-party system, the Democrats are going to look out for our environment. Not in Colorado. I'm going to let the legislator off the hook, but I'm not going to let our governor off the hook. Because Governor Polis has handpicked that COGCC committee who approves permits in the state of Colorado, and he green lights every single one of them. I hold you, Governor Polis, responsible for this mess and your handpicked COGCC. And let me tell you what it's done to me. I know this isn't about me, but I'm here to talk about what I've learned from organizations like Physicians for Social Responsibility. I'm going to die sooner. I have a more likely chance of getting dementia. And having cared for someone who died of dementia, that is not what I want to hear. I can get all kinds of cancers. And my newborn great-granddaughter, who came here or got into this world early because she lives a mile from the PDC well that's now horizontally drilling under Alt, south of town. I say she came early because of the impact of living around oil and gas. I am under the care of a pulmonologist, an ear, nose, and throat doctor. I've gone on heart medicine. Welcome to my world. So this is life and death. This isn't just some hothead citizen rambling here. These are our lives. And that PDC, when they pulled that force pooling notice, that they just went south of town. Huge. They still have their walls up. They just took down their drilling rigs. My grandson lives probably a mile from there. I live maybe 1.2. Last report I read, 2 kilometers is 1.2 miles. If you live within 2 kilometers of a well pad, good luck. Health impacts. That's us in Alt. They call Alt a unique little town. And it was. I kind of like the people of Alt. They're a mixed bag. They got me. They've got my wonderful neighbors. They've got working class people whom I adore. I come from the working class. But it's not unique. It's like every other town that dots the Front Range. Just being clobbered by fracking. And it's normalized. I'm here to unnormalize it. It's killing us.
Great job of it.
Thank you. They're gassing us. They are. I'm not gonna pussyfoot around with this thing. We are being gassed. And look at this beautiful blue sky. What are you complaining about, Carol? I'm back in Maine still, and we haven't seen the sun in 2 months. Well, guess what? It's not so beautiful when you look at it through Andrew's camera, which is like going to the Twilight Zone. Because you go from this beautiful environment and what could be a, call it, fabulous setting to what you see through that camera. And I think that's the impact. I can tell you my story, and I believe in stories. I talk stories. But this camera is the proof. So when I lost my protest for Bayswater, I backed up. I always have to do this. I have to pull back, and I have to immerse myself in self-care before I can come out of that little bungalow and all with my fists up, ready to fight the frack again. But they started drilling, and I was again driving into town from Route 14, and I could see the black smoke coming from this site. And I was trying to avoid it because I fought it and I lost. And I saw the jerks at Bayswater and their false rap before the COGCC. They were almost snickering because they knew they were going to get their permit approved. Do you know that only one permit in the state of Colorado has been rejected? And that was in a town, I believe it was Firestone, you can correct me, where a house blew up and people died. And I said that to the COGCC when I testified. Do I have to die? Do my neighbors have to die? Does somebody have to die before you people stop rubber stamping these permits? And they really cut me off. You're done. What was that? So, this is what we're up against up here. So when I saw that plume of last night called Kate, I remembered Andrew. His work was impressive to me. And she says, I need to introduce you to Andrew. I said, yes, you do. And Andrew and I have been doing these sites. Sometimes I have to bow out because it's too traumatizing.
Carol has the unfortunate distinction of being with me when I film some of the worst emission events that I film within a usual calendar year. And then I cannot help but exclaim and then see the face that Carol is making as it's sitting with her that the site we're filming is about a mile from where she lives.
Right. So much for grieving, so much for resting, so much for retirement. You know, I've been an activist all my life. It's time to fight this issue. I've always been an environmentalist. I'm a product of the 60s. I grew up in Cleveland, you know, when the Cuyahoga River was lit on fire by pollution. I saw what happened with the Clean Air Act and how they cleaned up Lake Erie, how they cleaned up Cleveland. I still believe that we can clean this mess up, but we've got to stop the oil and gas industry. probably many of you out there don't even remember the Twilight Zone, but I was looking into the Twilight Zone, but it was right there, and it looked so innocent, wasn't it? A little ugly, a little loud, a little smelly. When you see it through that camera, you understand why I'm under the care of pulmonologists, why my nose started bleeding when I got here, why I got nasal infections, sinus infections. I don't even let my dog out. We have ozone alerts here. And we've been blessed a little bit this summer, not so many. But imagine to live in Colorado on the Front Range in the summertime. You can't even go outside. People do because they have to work. The kids go out in the playground. At recess, if they're in school in the summer, maybe they're not, but they want to go out and play. But we have ozone alerts. What's that? Well, you get those little particles floating around there. You can't see them either, but they bury themselves in your lungs. And that might be what's causing my lung problems, my bronchial problems, my nasal problems. So this is real, folks. And this is a monster. We're looking at the belly of the beast here. And all I can encourage you to do is educate yourselves, become aware. I know it's frightening, it's existential, you feel powerless. This is the oil and gas industry. How do we fight them? Remember what Margaret Mead said, never doubt the power of a small group of people to change the world. Because that's the only thing that ever does. And I'm here as just one in this small group of people. And I'll die fighting this. I'll die from this. But I want to educate you to educate yourselves. Call a local environmental group. Connect yourself with someone like Andrew or someone at Colorado Rising or 350 or whatever's going on in your neighborhood. Get involved and find out how to protest through the state government.
Carol, you want to work for us?
I'd like to an education program for the citizens. Yes, I would.
No, it has been an absolute pleasure working with Carol, and I'm so glad she reached out to us. But it's hard, right, to show you the thing that you're concerned about and validate. Sorry, we're letting the car drive past.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
Validate the thing that you're concerned about, but also watch the impact that it has. So I kind of like, I'd be curious if you'd be willing to speak about what it feels like to see, you're so concerned about these things, and you're right, some of the emissions from drilling and fracking, the exhaust from the big diesel generators they all night, you can see pouring over the sound walls. A lot of it's fancy, especially equipment. And what does that scene do? I mean,
I just from coming out with you, I came here on Monday with Andrew and the video.
Yeah, our camera's just free floating.
Yeah,
there's no human being actually
it's
filming
just,
us right now. We're just
it's on a tripod. We're all set. But when I was with them, I was fine. When they left, the elephant returned and sat on my chest. That's what it feels like. If I talk about elephant, I was so overwhelmed. I meet with a therapist once a week. I'm not ashamed of that. It shows that I'm reaching out for help and I'm trying to get that help, and I get it from her. I had to write to her for the first time. I never bother her on email, but I was so upset and so overwhelmed, and it just kept growing, and the elephant got heavier and heavier, and I got more and more depressed. I mean, I've been so depressed and I'm trapped because financially I can't just pick everything up and move back to Maine. I would in a heartbeat. My heart is in Maine. It makes me cry because this is my dream house. I worked all my life to own my first home. I'm 71 years old. And I thought it was an answer to a prayer. And I'm living on the front lines of this is climate change. This is environmental destruction. This is the worst nightmare And I faced a lot of nightmares in my life, including Alzheimer's. But this is going to kill all of us. And I see how my little great-granddaughter came into this world underweight early. And everyone was just so worried about fattening her up. I can happily report she is healthy. I won't mention their names. My own family doesn't want to hear about it because it scares them too much. So when you start talking about this stuff, don't be surprised if people turn away. Because it is, I understand it. It's too depressing. It's overwhelming. You feel powerless. But we're not powerless because there are too many people like Andrew and our anonymous videographer fighting for us. Just reach out to them and they'll help you. Thank you.
The reason that, thank you so much, Carol, for sharing. And I don't know if there's any questions for folks that have been put in the chat. But the reason that we do this and try to expose these emissions, as disheartening as they may be to see, is because if we're not filming them, no one is. One of the challenges that we face and the challenges that we highlight is so much of what goes on at facilities like this one behind us is left up to self-policing by the operator themselves. I mean, in terms of looking for leaks, in terms of reporting leaks, in terms of reporting repairs that are done to those leaks or other emission sources, malfunctions. A lot of our regulatory regime is premised on this idea that the industry is going to self-police and that will be enough, that there'll be enough good faith actors, that they'll catch the emissions, and that we will not have an issue with the Front Range being continuously downgraded in our ozone attainment status. And so we're circling back to something Carol brought up, which is a very important point. One of the reasons we're concerned about emissions from oil and gas facilities in the Front Range, and in particular the emissions that occur during the drilling and fracking phase, is the volatile organic compounds, the nitrogen oxides that come off of those facilities and the equipment on those facilities while they're undergoing their activities. When they mix in the atmosphere in the presence of sunlight, you get ozone that is created. And ozone is also known as smog. Plenty of cities, I'm sure people are familiar with the issues that cities like LA have had with smog. Well, Denver on a bad day in summer is somewhat equivalent to, I think, what people picture in their head of like Southern California.
LA freedom. I've lived in LA.
And so, ozone is horribly impactful on people with respiratory issues, on children, on the weak, the infirm, and it exacerbates existing issues that people may have, and also leads to higher rates of childhood asthma in general. So we know that oil and gas is the major contributor locally of ozone-forming compounds, and so that's beyond. This is beyond the regional impact of having these facilities near your home, such as Carol does, and the impacts that you may have by being directly exposed to VOCs from those facilities. You have a larger regional context here in the Front Range, where everyone in Colorado who lives in Denver and all points north has to breathe bad air, especially in summer months, in part because of the unchecked emissions from oil and gas.
I just had, I hired this lovely woman, a young woman I just met. She was weeding my neighbor's yard, and she was in the job market looking for a job, just came. She's a native Colorado, just moved back to Colorado. She said, I told her I was concerned about her being outdoors because there was an ozone layer. She didn't know what I was talking about. I had explained it to her. I said, just come in the morning. Sometimes that's the best time to be outside here when there's an ozone layer. If you get out early in the morning, get your errands done and get back in. But imagine living with your windows sealed off. You can't take a deep breath. You can't open the window. And definitely can't smell the sea air. And I do miss that. I'm locked up in my house. Windows are sealed. I have an air cleaner in every room, an air purifier. I also know when I talk to the big guns about air purifiers, they don't think they're doing us much good. But we have to have a false sense of hope too. So I have all my air cleaners going. But she came back to work for me a couple days later, and I insisted she come in the morning and check and make sure about the ozone level. And sure enough, she told me her throat was hurting, scratchy. She was a mess.
You can keep talking, Carol. Keep going.
Oh, okay.
I'm just, want to give folks another view of the exhaust from this compressor. I mean, they can still hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
And again, it's, you know, not probably the most ideal footage that you all have as we're filming it through the lens of another camera. But if you, we'll just keep it held here for a bit. Again, I want to draw your attention, when the wind picks it up, you'll see it better, to the plume. So the actual emissions we're concerned about are not the little source of heat that looks like a little candle maybe flickering at the top of that wall. That's just the hot air coming out of the exhaust stack of this compressor. The thing that we're concerned about when we're looking at oil and gas facilities are the emissions that carry away from these heated sources, such as this compressor exhaust stack. Because again, this is indication that not all of the methane, not all of the VOCs that are being combusted in that piece of equipment are being combusted. Some of them are escaping directly into the atmosphere. And this is, unfortunately, what I'm showing you right now doesn't even come anywhere near the realm of a compliance issue. This is a somewhat expected level of, I would say, exhaust from a compressor. And that's an important point because a lot of the emissions that occur at oil and gas facilities are, one, inevitable. There's no real way to extract oil and gas from the ground, store oil in tanks on a facility, and not have emissions at some point along the line. Sorry. Oh, I see the question. I will respond to that in 1 second. Thank you for the question. Again, apologies for us being a little bit rough around the edges. This is a first go. But to finish my, the other point I wanted to make, not only are emissions inevitable from oil and gas extraction, emissions are also oftentimes sort of expected from certain activities. And so when you're combusting methane on site in either a compressor or in a flare, you are not going to have ever 100% efficiency. There's always going to be some inefficiency, and there's always going to be some methane that escapes. And we just have to live with the fact that pollution is always going to be occurring from these facilities. And to that point, that question in the comment, quantification is challenging. Our camera at the moment does not currently have the capability of doing quantification. It is primarily a qualitative instrument in the sense that we are looking for emissions from sources that we would expect there not to be emissions from. And if we do find those, we will share those with our state regulatory agency, because these are leak detection and repair devices. So the industry themselves use these cameras to go onto their facility, inspect all of the components, and find leaks. What we're seeing right now, those emissions from that exhaust from that compressor are not a leak. That's, again, just sort of expected amount of emissions, hydrocarbons that are going to escape from any combusted source. But when we are looking at a facility, and actually we have some, given our challenges right now with zooming in, we have photos that we took of this facility that I think we can overlay on our video. So for the folks back managing the stream, if we can put photo 1 up and tell me, anonymous human being, if it is showing. But I want to be able to show folks or walk people through what we're typically looking at a facility. Is there a photo displaying for people? Not yet. Okay. But there are a few primary components that we look at when we're looking for emissions from an oil and gas facility. Huh?
Do you want me to put it on there?
Sure, you can do that. Because we're often, as you can tell from where we're standing, we're never filming in the most ideal circumstances. Yeah. We're not standing on site. We are always filming facilities from where we have a somewhat decent view, even if it's across a cow pasture, where we can stand on the side of a road or some other public space. So we're really looking for not often the things that I would consider leaks. They are much larger emission events. And there are really just a handful of pieces of equipment that we typically look at. So from a facility like this, and I don't know if the photo is displaying yet. It is not. Okay. Maybe what we can do, you're gonna, again, bear with us. No, keep it on the lens. I'm gonna try to, well, let me change. I can show you through the OGI camera, even though it won't be ideal. Live audience, you are guinea pigs just like we are here. So thank you for joining us for this experiment. Okay, you can put it up to the lens again. And once we get it focused, what you're going to see, and you're going to be seeing it through an OGI camera, so it might be a little weird, but we can follow up with photos and explanations. You're seeing a row of what looks like, if we can focus. Also, just so you're all aware, it's very hot in Colorado today,
Well,
and the sun is bearing down on us, and we might be getting to the point where our brains are going to fry. So
yeah,
if I start mixing my words
There you
together, is it clear or is it unfocused? So what the camera is looking at right now, and there's not, I don't think, going to be anything that you'll see. If you do see emissions, someone holler because I didn't see anything. We're looking at the row of separators. And so separators are often something that we look at in an oil and gas facility. And what this device does is when oil, gas comes up from the well itself, had a truck drive by, apologies. When oil and gas comes up from the well itself, it's never pre-sorted. It's mixed together. You get oil, you get gas, you get water. So the first step for any product from the well is to go to a separator. And a separator separates the oil from the water, from the gas, so that all of it can be stored properly or moved off-site. And separators, in order to separate all these components, they need heat applied. So all of them are going to have little burners on them. And so, again, I don't think you'll be seeing anything right now because I didn't notice anything at any of the separators. But if you do see emissions, if you do see a plume, let me know. But what we often find on separator stacks is, and weirdly enough, with increasing frequency, I feel like, in the Front Range, is some of their burners will malfunction or their burners will not be on or operating. And what that then amounts to is these little stacks that you can probably see turn into just a venting stack. They turn into a pipe that's just venting methane, volatile organic compounds directly into the atmosphere. They're not controlling them in any way. And then I'm going to move the camera over one last time and explain it.
And keep in mind, I understand people want quantitative, qualitative is what you're looking through this camera is qualitative. Now you can count how many,
well, again, so in the instance of a separator being unlit, what that would indicate is that there is a malfunction. And so this camera can determine that a piece of equipment is malfunctioning. We don't need to quantify the emissions coming off of that source to know that those emissions that are occurring are not supposed to be occurring. So that's what we're looking for in separators. Are we getting another question?
We can show the photo.
Oh, we can show the photo now? Perfect.
There it is.
Awesome. All right. So the photo now is displayed for you all. So what we were just looking at on the camera was what's on the right-hand side of this photo. It's this row of stacks. Again, look like little chimneys. Those are the separators. Those are all separate burners. Each of those could potentially malfunction. If those do, any of the methane or volatile organic compounds that are being combusted in that, would have been combusted in that burner are no longer going to be combusted, which means they're going to be released directly into the atmosphere. Is the photo still showing? So now moving to the left, and again, if we could zoom on the live stream, we would just do that this way, but we're going to have to show you a static photo. Moving to the left in the photo, though, you'll see the container, the wall or behind which the compressor is that I've showed you a few times. Just to the right of that container is a set of tanks, storage tanks. Another major source, probably the major source of emissions, is storage tanks. Because what happens when you're storing oil, when you're storing the water that comes up from the well in a tank, these are full of volatile compounds, hence volatile organic compounds. And those liquids are sitting in a closed container. Okay, sitting in a closed container, the sun is beating down on them like it's beating down on us. They get warm, like we are very warm right now. Those liquids start producing vapors. They start producing vapors that then collect in those tanks and increase the pressure in those tanks. And in order for you to have your tank not explode because it's under pressure, you have to relieve the pressure. And the pressure, in this sense, is vapors in the form of methane and volatile organic compounds. So historically, traditionally, the easiest, cheapest, quickest way to relieve pressure from a tank is to just open a valve and let it all just escape into the atmosphere. That's what venting is. It is just allowing methane and VOCs to escape into the atmosphere with no control applied, no attempt to mitigate those emissions. This facility, and it will be hard to see in the photo because the photo isn't zoomed in. And actually, if we want to switch to photo 3 really quickly, if we can do that, it's a little bit closer zoomed in on the tanks. There are devices on top of the tank batteries that are supposed to capture these vapors. And you see these piping. Those vapors are supposed to be, in Colorado on a site this size, routed to the flare. And the flares on this photo are the tall, what look like chimneys on the left side of the photo, on the left side of that wall. Flares are a control device. That is what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to control emissions that would otherwise occur in the form of methane or VOCs by burning them on site. Now, when you burn methane, you get another greenhouse gas, CO2, but you're at least not pumping methane, which is over 80 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas, into the atmosphere. So the ideal scenario is that all your tank vapors are collected, they are routed to the flare, and they are burnt off as efficiently as possible to produce CO2. You're still producing CO2, so you're just picking your poison. It's one pollutant over the other. But we'd much prefer CO2 in this scenario than methane. The point, though, is that when you're storing liquids on site in tanks, you are going to have vapors that will have to be dealt with, and those vapors are pollution. And so there is, going back to what I was saying, no way for them to conduct business in this way without pollution occurring at some point along the line. So whether it's separators, whether it's the tanks, whether it's flares, any of these equipments, even when they're working ideally, you're still going to have combusted sources that are burning off methane. They're producing CO2. They're probably also going to have some methane volatile organic compounds that are escaping, like we saw in the compressor, because no combustion is 100% efficient. And besides, so that's in the ideal scenario. And as soon as you have one piece malfunction, you're going to have potential emissions. And so what we are looking for primarily with this camera, since we can't quantify, are the things that constitute malfunctions.
But the fact that we're in a non-attainment zone and our air on some days is the worst in the world sounds pretty qualitative and quantitative to me. So if Colorado spouts that it has the strictest regulations for oil and gas in the country, if that was true, why would we have the worst air in the world? Also, and Andrew knows this very well because he files the complaints. When we see these major emission events, he'll do the paperwork, he'll do the legwork, he'll file the complaint. And I want our audience to know, this is an unregulated industry. I don't care what they say. Do you know how these things get reported? Self-reporting. They're on the honor system. And believe me, they will cut corners at every turn to get the cheapest way of getting rid of their emissions. We see it on the weekends all the time.
Okay, so I know we're over time on our stream. We're getting probably near the top of the hour. I don't have my phone on me. So I'm going to start calling things to a close. I want to say that I have one thing I did not mention, the site behind us that we didn't show you, and it's too far across the field for you to see in the stream anyways. When on Monday, when Carol and I were here testing tech for this live stream today, we filmed an enormous emission event from that facility. And we're going to drop the YouTube link in the chat so you can all see what we're talking about.
We have one question quickly.
One question, yeah.
Oh, which state agency regulates the permits to emit the pollution into the air?
In Colorado and in most states, it is whatever agency has been delegated that authority by the EPA. And in Colorado, it's the Air Pollution Control Division. Oftentimes, it's a similar sort of agency in the other states that we work. You'll have a state agency that's typically more, in our case, it's the Energy and Carbon Management Commission that handles the site permitting, the permits for when an operator wants to drill a new pad, and that's who Carol went and protested in front of. And then the actual permits for pollution are handled by a separate agency, a separate regulatory agency. So there's this disconnect between these two regulatory agencies. One is concerned about what's going on the site, what's happening in terms of just the way in which they're, kind of proposing to drill and store liquids. The other agency is primarily concerned with the polluting sources. These agencies don't always talk to each other. They don't always work well together, as unfortunately tends to be the case. But yes, it is the Air Pollution Control Division that does the permitting for air pollution. Returning to my point, we will drop in the chat to conclude this stream a video that we took from Monday of the site that is behind us, or really in front of me, behind all of you. Now it's in front of you across this field. You can see a workover rig potentially in the live stream. This is one of the other pads that was also just recently drilled or fracked. And on Monday, even though we're standing here over a quarter of a mile away, we filmed a plume of methane and VOCs that was taller than that workover rig, which just as a sort of like rough estimate of height, because I'm not very good at doing this, let's just say the plume was 75 to 100 feet tall. Large enough that even though we're very far away, less than ideal conditions for looking for emissions, we saw it very, very clearly, to the point that I made one of my exclamations that really depresses Carol about oh my God, this is the worst emission event I've seen all year. But we're going to put that YouTube link in the chat so you can view that yourselves. We also have another live stream coming up in just about an hour. So, if you're interested in continuing to watch me mumble and fumble through this, log back in. And Carol, do you have any last words?
I just want the public to know that I also filed complaints with the air quality control people in the state of Colorado. They don't listen to citizens. Citizens do not have a voice. And that really upsets me. So if I'm upset today, deal with it. Because I just saw a major event here on Monday, and I live here. And if you're moved by what you heard today, get involved. Fight this beast. Fight with us. We need you. Thank you.
Thank you all, and we'll see you in an hour.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Carol. We off? Okay, let's start. We live?
Mhm.
Awesome. All right, welcome back, everyone. This is going to be a little disorienting at first if you're just joining us, but we are trying to actively show you some emissions that are ongoing right now. My name is Andrew Closter. I'm the Colorado Field Advocate with Earthworks. For those who are joining us from the first stream, welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us today. For those who are just logging into the second stream, welcome. We are right now showing you a live feed from an optical gas imaging camera. These are specially designed infrared cameras that allow us to see pollutants that are otherwise invisible to the naked eye from oil and gas facilities. Those pollutants are planet-warming methane and other volatile organic compounds such as benzene, which is a carcinogen. What you are looking at, this psychedelic display that we are trying to focus for you, we are right now trying to film it through the lens of another camera. So not the best tech, we apologize. This is as those who joined the first stream heard me say over and over again, this is very much an experiment for Earthworks, trying to live stream from the field. And so there are inevitably going to be some hiccups along the way. But what you are seeing, I can't tell how well you are seeing it, is some colorful imagery and what looks like probably some very, very brightly colored, almost maybe washed out. I'm going to pause for a second as a truck passes us on this dirt road. Almost washed out, brightly colored stacks or chimneys. Those are flares. In Colorado, all of our flares are enclosed. They're technically called enclosed combustion devices. The flame is at the base of that stack, and then the stack itself is almost like a chimney stack. And what you see, hopefully, you will see that they are very colorful, very washed out. That in this setting on the OGI camera implies that they are warm relative to other objects around them. These flares are lit. They are actively burning methane and volatile organic compounds. You'll also see at the top of the flares what looks like almost like a fire flame. That is not visible to the naked eye. That's heat, that's hot air. What I really want to draw your attention to, and it may vary depending on how the wind is shifting right now, is what will look like kind of just a cloud of purplish maybe gases coming away from that heated source. That plume of cooler gases, if they're purpler or darker, they're going to be cooler in this setting, is what we're actually looking for in terms of methane emissions from these flares. So flares, quick recap for those who were on the first stream. There may be brand new information for those of you just joining us. A flare is a control device. You have a flare on an oil and gas well pad because you're trying to mitigate pollutants. When you're flaring, you are flaring off, in this case, on a facility like this, typically vapors that have built up inside of tanks. Those vapors take the form of methane, they take the form of volatile organic compounds. If you don't combust them in a flare, and I'm gonna really quickly pause again as a giant truck drives past us. All right, if you're not actively combusting those tank vapors, the only other option is to potentially vent them directly into the atmosphere. So to control the pressure levels in tanks, if you're storing oil from the formation in a tank, you need to combust those vapors, and that's what a flare does. Flares, however, are not 100% efficient. These enclosed combustors in Colorado are rated by the manufacturers as being 95 to 98% efficient at destroying methane. So another car passing us. This will be our light while we're here on the side of this road. Combustors are not ever 100% efficient. Even these enclosed combustors have some inefficiency, and what that inefficiency takes the form of is methane, volatile organic compounds that escape, being destroyed in that combustion process, and released directly into the atmosphere. We can't, with our camera, this is not a quantitative device primarily. It can do quantification. We don't have the capacity to do that right here now. We can't quantify the efficiency of these flares just by looking at them. I can show you that there are emissions that are not being controlled in the flare. We can see that in the form of the plume. Is there a question?
Does this mean the flare is not fully combusting?
It means that there is incomplete combustion in the flare. Whether or not that incomplete combustion is outside of the manufacturer's recommended efficiency standard for that flare is sort of an open question. This, again, we are seeing the inefficiency. We don't know how inefficient it is. That depends a lot on the flow rate to the flare. It depends on a lot that's going on internally. The only way to truly determine if that flare is as efficient as it should be would be for the operator to conduct a test in that flare. That is something that right now operators will be required to do in Colorado, but they have a very long off-ramp, or runway, I should say. It's up until, I believe, the middle of 2028 that they have to test all of the combustors that are active in the state to really get a full sense of whether or not our combustors are hitting their recommended efficiencies, because right now we're just relying on what the manufacturer says. So that I jumped right in there, didn't really go over an intro. Again, if you're joining us, you probably already got a lot of an intro, and I'm going to apologize. I'm not going to be nearly as compelling as a speaker as Carol from Alt was, but she only was able to join us for the first stream today. But we are standing now, the first stream we brought to you about an hour ago. We were about a mile or two east of Alt. Now we're about a mile or two on the other side of Alt, on the west side of the town of Alt. And again, for those newly joining, Alt is a small town in Weld County, up near the Wyoming border, about 75 miles north of Denver. This is a facility owned by the operator Bayswater, and it is a facility that was just recently fracked. When we were here on Monday, they were just taking the sound walls down. So if you've ever seen a facility as they're in the drilling or fracking phase, they'll put up these giant 12, 20-foot tall walls that the concept is that they're supposed to prevent sound noise pollution from all of the devices that they're running, the giant generators, while they're drilling and fracking. In practice, if you've ever actually been next to one of these facilities when they're fracking, you're going to hear the sound from those generators, those engines, regardless of that sound wall. But anyways, on Monday, they were just taking the sound wall down. Now, presumably, this is a site that is just actively producing, or at least gearing up to be actively producing. And so again, we see the combustors running. Presumably those combustors, if they're running for the right reasons, are flaring the tank vapors from the tanks. It's going to be hard to see in the live stream because unfortunately we're quite far from this site as well. We're staring at it across an agricultural field, so I don't know what you can all see for the folks on the live stream. And again, there's a truck coming. I'm going to pause for a second. Great time for questions to populate this in. I lost my train of thought. All these trucks just disrupting me. But anyways, if you could see the site more clearly, we could zoom in on our live stream camera, which we are unfortunately incapable of doing at the moment. When we're looking in visible light with our naked eyes, you could see that to the left of the flares, there are some large storage tanks that are where the oil and the produced water from the formation would be stored. And again, these tanks are sitting in the sun with liquids in them that have volatile compounds in them. And so in the sun in Colorado, and it is a very warm day today, we're getting close to 100 degrees with the sun beating down on us. Those tanks are going to warm up. The liquids inside are going to warm up. You're going to get vapors that form in the form of methane and VOCs. And if you don't control those vapors by rooting them to a flare, you are going to just have to release them directly into the atmosphere. So the flaring that we are seeing is the ideal form of dealing with the vapors, even if there is inefficiency involved, because otherwise these vapors would potentially have to just be directly released into the atmosphere. But that's not to excuse the fact that the flaring, even if it was 100% efficient, would be converting that methane, converting those vapors into CO2. So you're still getting a greenhouse gas, you're still impacting the planet, the climate, but you're kind of picking your poison. Do you want CO2 or do you want to directly release methane, which is 80 times more potent than CO2, into the atmosphere? So as long as this operator is doing what they're supposed to be doing and running the flares to control the tank vapors, they're at least controlling those tank vapors. Again, there are questions about the efficiency. We are definitely still seeing some methane and VOC emissions off of those flares. But that's sort of a rundown of what we're seeing and why we're potentially seeing it. I will say another thing that we would have liked to have shown you, and I'm going to have to pause here again because we have another big water truck or some truck pulling past us.
Someone asked if it's a brine truck.
It could be a brine truck. I could not read what's on the side of the truck as it passed by. Too much dust. But anyways, where was I? The other thing that we would have liked to have shown you at this site, and it's going to be hard for us to show you again on the live stream with the abilities that we have right now, is because this was a site that was just recently fracking and just started into the production phase. It's a site that, according to current regulations in Colorado, needs to be actively monitored with fence line monitors. And there is a monitor that we can see visibly, but it's going to be impossible for me to point it out to you all on the live stream, unfortunately. But one of the things that we've been working on in Colorado is looking at these sites that are actively fracking or drilling or recently producing, and looking at the monitoring data that the fence line monitors are producing. Because the idea with these fence line monitors is they're supposed to be detecting major emission events from these activities. And we recently put out a report, which I'm sure the team back in the office can plop into the chat at the end of this live stream, called Certified Disaster, where we looked at sites in Colorado that have employed this air quality monitoring on their fence lines during the stages of drilling and fracking in the first 6 months of production. And we just tried to compare and contrast when we filmed emission events versus when the monitors detected them in their monitoring data, which we had to receive from the state as publicly available information. And that report outlines our methodology, it outlines our process. And the major finding, and one of the things that we wanted to sort of reflect on while we're out in the field with you all today on this live stream, was the fact that these monitors are missing all of the events, at least, that we are recording on our camera. And if we could be a little bit closer to this facility and actually show you where the location of the monitors, one of the major reasons that is probably the case is you've seen, hopefully now, the few times that we have shown you what's going on right now live in the camera, where these emissions currently are occurring from this flare. This inefficiency is occurring from this flare. Typically, if you're filming emissions from a flare or from a tank or from many of the major sources on an oil and gas facility, they're going to be elevated. That plume is going to be elevated as it leaves the source, and it's going to be elevated potentially as it travels away from the facility. A lot of these fence line monitors are set up at chest height, the chest of a just average adult. And if they're sitting on the fence line of the facility and that plume is at, let's say, starting at 10, 12 feet high and then drifting over the pad, there's no chance that monitor, pausing again for traffic. During these truck interludes, great time for people to throw out questions in the chat. We're going to have another one very shortly. There's another truck driving up the road. But what I was saying was, if you just compare where the height of the plume to the height of most of where these monitors are located, it's quite apparent that they're going to be missing a lot of emissions from a lot of major sources on oil and gas facilities. And that is what we found and outlined in our report. Apologies while another truck passes.
Is this a GF320 camera?
Yes, we are using a FLIR GF320 OGI camera, or optical gas imaging camera. So this is a high-end infrared camera with a special filter inside of it that filters out most of the infrared wavelength and focuses in on the wavelength where hydrocarbon compounds are absorbing infrared radiation. And so hydrocarbons include methane, include other volatile organic compounds that we're primarily concerned with when we are looking at emissions from oil and gas facilities. In just 1 second, if you want to take the camera away, I'm going to pan across the site to show you. Any questions, continue to pop them in the chat. I don't have Carol here to carry on while I am surveying the site. One thing I did want to re-up from the first stream that we mentioned as well was ozone. So a lot of our concern around oil and gas emissions, and I apologize if the wind is affecting you. A lot of our concern around oil and gas gas emissions is a proximity-based concern. People are living nearby to these facilities, to these pollutants. Again, things like benzene, things like toluene are potentially going to have impacts on their health, and that's a big concern. But another thing in the Front Range that we have to consider with all of the new facilities, and especially new facilities that are going in all the time, so this again was just recently fracked, this is a brand new multi-well pad, is they're all contributing overall cumulatively to what is an increasingly dire situation in regards to ozone in the Front Range. Were downgraded again just recently by the EPA for ozone attainment. We're now in severe non-attainment of ozone standards. And what that means is that ozone in the Front Range is getting worse. And what that means in reality on the ground for people is that the impacts of ozone on their health are potentially going to get worse. And this includes impacts on, in terms of asthma, in terms of if you have respiratory issues, if you have other sort of pre-existing health conditions. It's never really good to breathe bad air. It's especially not good to breathe bad air if you already have pre-existing health conditions or are otherwise vulnerable to pollution. Ozone is bad. Ozone, there's a lot of variety of factors that contribute to ozone and the formation of ozone. But one of the primary sources of ozone-forming compounds in the Front Range locally, you'll hear a lot of times when people are trying to downplay the severity of the ozone issue in the Front Range. Well, a lot of it comes in from out of state. A lot of it comes from China. The trade winds will blow in all these awful pollutants and settle over the Front Range, and we just have nothing that we can do about it. As whether that is true or not, whether the majority of ozone-forming compounds are coming from elsewhere, the fact of the matter is we have right here in front of us an example of a brand new polluting facility that is contributing to our ozone problem in the Front Range, because the major domestic source of ozone in Colorado is oil and gas pre-production activities. So we can do something about that, and we should do something about that because we can't control what happens elsewhere. But that is another thing to just consider in regards to the emissions from a facility like this. You have the concerns, the proximity-based concerns of someone who may live just directly downwind. You also have the overall concerns of all of the people who live, the millions of people who live in Denver and north of Denver, who are breathing air that is cumulatively impacted by all of the oil and gas development that continues to occur despite all of the rules and the regulations that we have passed to curb the impacts of the industry. We haven't quite gotten to the point where we're actually actively telling them, no, permitting a new facility right now when we're in severe ozone non-attainment may not be a good idea. So that's just another concern, and it's something that we talked a little bit on the first stream, but wanted to definitely re-up that. Any additional questions in the chat? I will say I'm going to try to keep this one a little bit more short because it is hot today.
Let's try one more look.
Also, for all the folks joining, given that this is an experiment and you are all guinea pigs just like I am, if you have feedback or ideas for how we could make this content more compelling, please feel free to reach out to us, reach out to me. Love to hear the criticism, especially if I'm not doing a good job, if I'm a terrible host, please let me know. I would like to improve. If we want to do this format more, we kind of need to know what works and what doesn't. So appreciate your input, your feedback, and any additional questions you may have. I'll hold a bit for any other questions, because otherwise I could just ramble on until I pass out here from heat exhaustion, but I really don't want to do that. We've already shown you a lot of vulnerability today. I don't know if I need to show you that much vulnerability. I will also say, on the last stream, at the end of the last stream, I really quickly mentioned a significant venting event that we filmed at one of the sites that we were looking at for the first stream. And we, I believe, had the link put in the chat, but we will do that again for this stream because it's a much more significant emission event than what we're seeing with these flares right now. And that's one of the things that I think is important to recognize as we are sharing this live from this field with you all is looking for methane pollution is sometimes challenging because emissions are intermittent and an event can occur for 10, 15 minutes and then it can be gone. And so if you're not there to capture it, it potentially just occurred and no one has any idea that it occurred. So the event that we filmed on Monday when we were doing a tech test at the prior site for the prior stream was one of the more significant ones I have seen all calendar year as I've been out surveying facilities for methane pollution in Colorado. And if you follow that link after the stream and check out that video, what you'll see, just to kind of give you a preview and an idea of what you're looking at, you'll see a crane tower sort of structure in the OGI, and that's a workover rig. That is a drilling rig that is deployed on a site to potentially do maintenance on a well. And those are relatively tall structures. And what you'll see in that video is the plume of methane and VOCs that we captured is so significant that even though we're over a quarter of a mile away, it is taller than that infrastructure that's on the pad. It's taller than the enclosed combustion devices that are on that pad, which these enclosed combustion devices are probably 15 to 20 feet tall. So massive, significant event that we captured from quite a distance away. And the only reason we captured it is because we were out doing a field tech test for this live stream and just happened to point the camera in the right direction for 10 minutes while it was ongoing. And then 10 minutes later, it was nothing. So again, emission events, major emission events, significant emission events can be extremely intermittent. And the challenge is, if we're not filming it, and if the operators, as I said, are not effectively monitoring for it, the state's not out here every day looking at these things, that event would have just occurred and we'd be none the wiser. And that happens, multiply a single site by any potential emission that could occur by all of the facilities, all the giant multi-well pads in the Front Range. And that's just Colorado. You start to get a sense of the sort of nature of the problem here with providing direct oversight of emissions from these facilities. It's not easy to quantify emissions with fence line monitors. It's not always easy to even see emissions with a powerful camera. And so what we're left with is an industry that is still primarily, despite all of the rules that we put in place, getting away with a lot of potential climate harming, human health harming pollutants without a whole lot of oversight of those pollution events that are occurring. If they occurred and no one recorded them, they just may as well not have happened, except for the fact that they have an impact on our climate and on our health.
2 questions.
Yes.
Does the industry or regulatory agencies in your area use the same cameras to detect leaks or visualize these releases?
Yes. So the industry in Colorado, and we have the most stringent requirements in this regard in the nation, are required to, on a facility this size, a brand new facility, and I don't know how many wells are on this pad, but probably upwards of a dozen. In 1 second, I'm going to pause as another truck drives past us. We have another truck coming down the road, but I'll try to be quick. The industry is required, operators on facilities this size are required to probably at least do monthly inspections with a leak detection and repair device, such as a camera like this. And then they're supposed to report any issues they found and conduct any repairs. But again, that is a self-policing mechanism. So while we, can hope potentially that they are conducting their monthly reports honestly and detecting any and all emission events, it still is sort of up to them to report themselves for potential compliance issues. And you can see where the incentives there are not, they're a little wishy-washy, because if you didn't report, who would really know that you didn't report? So it is great to have these LDAR requirements in place. It's great to hold the industry accountable in that regard. It still doesn't really resolve the issue of the fact that it's a system that kind of empowers them to regulate themselves when it comes to air pollution.
And for the fence line monitoring, are they using CAMS or PAMS?
At this facility, I am not sure what the monitors were. A lot of them that we looked at were using continuous air quality monitors. But the thing is, these are not, so the monitors that are being deployed in the field in Colorado, and this is one of the first kind of wide scale deployments of this technology that we're aware of, which is one of the reasons we wrote our report here, are not the most sophisticated pieces of technology. So even though they are somewhat quantitative devices, they're really just, the way most of these monitors work is they set a threshold for, let's say, VOC emissions. And if that monitor grabs a sample of air that crosses that threshold, it will set off an alarm. They're more like a fire alarm system than they are like a device that is going to be sitting there actively kind of sampling the air that's coming off of this facility. And again, importantly, they're only going to be able to sample what passes directly over the monitor itself. They're not just, grabbing an entire sample of the air that is circulating around the facility. A plume has to cross directly over. The wind has to be blowing into the ideal conditions, and a plume has to cross directly over that monitor's path for that monitor to grab a sample of that air and then detect whether or not it's above or below a threshold and set off an alarm. So they're not super sophisticated devices. They're really almost more comparable to an LDAR device, where you're just looking for an emissions event. You're looking for evidence of an emissions event that occurred more than you're using them as a way to measure emissions. They're not measuring methane emissions. They're monitoring, and that's different. They're detecting emission events. And that's what we found, was that when they're compared to our camera, even when we're filming sites from very less than ideal distances, the industry would never film their site and look for leaks from the side of a road, hundreds of yards away, because it's not really how you want to do this. We at Earthworks have to work around these challenges. But even when we are filming major events that we can detect immediately from a quarter of a mile away, those monitors on those sites were not detecting those same events. And so that's, again, if you really are interested in that, it may have already been linked in the comment thread, not sure, but we will drop the link in there. You can look at the Certified Disaster Report. And if you have questions, feel free to follow up with us.
So for someone just joining, could you briefly describe how you interpret what's in the camera and what location we're at?
Yeah, for a new audience member, thank you for joining. We are, depending on, I'm not sure what you're going to see in the camera viewfinder because I haven't been monitoring. We are, oh yeah, that is quite significant. All right, good, you're getting a show. We are looking at an oil and gas facility, a multi-well pad owned by the operator Bayswater. We're just west of the town of Ault in northern Colorado. And what you're looking at as we try to focus our camera lens, phone lens on the camera lens, is you're looking at a series of combustion devices or flares. Combustion devices being just a fancy term for a flare. These are enclosed, so they're not open tip flares. And what you'll see is kind of psychedelic colors, this rainbow sort of palette. The colors are just indicating temperature variances between objects in the frame. And so you'll see that the flares are relatively washed out. They're probably the brightest colored thing in the frame. And you'll also see what looks like almost flames leaping off of the flare, the top of the flare. That is hot, heated air coming off of that flare. What we're really focused on and what we want you to focus on is not the heat, not that, even though that may look like the most dramatic thing, but all of the stuff that sort of is moving away from the flare, drifting away from the flare. The plume, in other words, is what we call it. That is the methane, the volatile organic compounds that are not being controlled in the process of combusting those compounds. So a flare is a control device. It is designed to combust methane, combust volatile organic compounds, and destroy them by converting them into CO2, which is a whole other issue, but destroy them so they're not released directly into the atmosphere. And a flare is never going to be 100% efficient. These flares in Colorado these enclosed flares are more efficient than what you'd get from an open-tip flare, but we essentially rely on the manufacturer's recommended efficiency, because what we're looking at right now in terms of the plume of hydrocarbons that's potentially moving off these flares. In 1 second, Becca, I could, it's really significant right now. I might just move the camera slightly so that you can get a better view of the actual plume. Bear with me, folks. But what we're focused on, with what we want you to focus on, is the emissions that are moving away from the flare and drifting across the site or into the atmosphere, because that's the actual evidence of methane VOCs that are not being destroyed in that flare. I'm just trying to readjust the camera so you might have a slightly better view of that. Feel free to ask questions of me while I'm staring into the camera lens.
One of our guests is a certified thermographer in OGI for Physicians for Social Responsibility Pennsylvania, here to support your work.
Perfect.
Love the live feed from the field.
Thank you. So I think hopefully if the plume is still cooperating, the wind is still cooperating, you'll see a little bit more of the contours of the actual plume. And that's what we really want you to pay attention to, is not the heat at the source of the flare, but all of the hydrocarbons that are relatively quickly cooling as they enter the atmosphere from the flare and moving away from the site. That is where the inefficiency is. That's where we're capturing emissions that are not being controlled in that flare. And so this is a different thing. I'll say it's important to note that like this is different than you may have heard. If you're in the know about oil and gas, you may have heard of unlit flares. That is not what we're seeing right here. These flares are definitely lit. They are burning, they are combusting. So it's a slightly different realm. An unlit flare means that the flame is completely out, and that giant flare is serving as just a chimney to vent VOCs, vent methane directly into the atmosphere. In this regard, we are seeing combustion occurring for sure. We are just also seeing everything that is not being combusted in that flare. And as I noted for folks who joined earlier, so this is a repeat for the new attendees. Right now, we're sort of in this realm where no one truly knows, just looking at this image, how inefficient or efficient that flare is. We don't know if it's hitting its manufacturer recommended efficiency of 95 to 98% efficient at destroying hydrocarbons. We just know that there's inefficiency occurring, and what that inefficiency means is pollution. And to be honest, to be frank, let's say that what you're seeing when you see that plume is the recommended efficiency. Let's say this flare is performing exactly as designed. It still is polluting, and that's what I think you need to sort of understand, is that pollution is almost par for the course. When you're extracting oil and gas from the ground, there is going to be pollution, and regulatory bodies are primarily in the game of mitigating that pollution as much as possible, but absolutely eliminating pollution from oil and gas. The only way to do that would have been to never drill this site in the first place. If you didn't want to have any emissions from this facility, it should have never been drilled, because as soon as it's drilled, there will be pollution.
As a Colorado resident, I'm curious where this flaring location is located.
We are right now like 2 miles west of the town of Ault. So we focused on Ault today for our live stream because Ault has had the misfortune of being besieged by new oil and gas drilling in the last year or two. There have been, at least by my count, more than half a dozen new multi-well pads all drilled and fracked in the last year around this tiny little community north of Greeley, about 75 miles north of Denver, which is a story that many communities in the Front Range have faced at some various point over the last couple of years. Residents wake up one day and the skyline now consists of drilling rigs looming over them. And the actual answers as to what's going on, what rights do I have to protest this? Unfortunately, most of the time, once a permit has been granted, that permit is going to go through. This new facility will be drilled, it will be fracked, it will start producing, and it will continue to pollute for decades to come, with no real sort of accounting for the impact that adding a new polluting source to an environment that is already covered in polluting sources here in the Northern Front Range has on our cumulative sort of air quality. Any other questions?
Have you seen the PHMSA pipeline leaks and safety rulemaking? Comments are due today. Some groups are asking for them to require them to use OGI for their leak detection.
Yes, I have seen those, and yes, that is a good recommendation. The very fact that they are not required to do that currently on pipelines is horribly disturbing. But pipelines are, just so you all know, a whole nother regulatory regime so the current regulatory bodies who are concerned with this facility, the Air Pollution Control Division and the Energy and Carbon Management Commission in Colorado, don't actually regulate pipelines. That's an entire separate regulatory body. But pipelines are another concern because pipelines crisscross any oil and gas basin, productive oil and gas basin. And when we at Earthworks kind of point out sort of laxness or gaps in regulation of oil and gas facilities, the reality for pipelines is typically far, far worse because they are almost absolutely excluded from any sort of oversight. So yes, OGI detection, OGI inspections of pipelines is essential because we don't really know how bad the emissions are until we start looking. If we're not looking, we will never know.
Can you mention the report again? And they'll drop a link.
Yeah, the report, the Certified Disaster Report, which I've mentioned a few times as we've been standing here, is a report we put together looking at sites like this one that are actively monitoring. They have active monitors looking at air quality, and we compared and contrasted what we see in our camera in terms of emission events versus what operators are detecting from fence line air quality monitors. And we also there's a lot more in the report. The report really digs into a specific air quality monitoring company in particular, Project Canary, but our field research really is more broadly sort of based on looking at kind of the efficacy of this monitoring program in Colorado. And what we found was a complete and utter disconnect between the emissions that we were filming in the camera and the emission events that we were documenting via optical gas imaging and the emission events that these monitors were detecting. So that report, again, is certified disaster. It's not too lengthy. It's a little wordy if you've never read a report before, but there's some nice visuals in it and pictures and maps that you might also find appealing. And we have some videos as well, some other kind of, they have like a one-page handout, but yeah, they'll drop a link. You can check that out if you haven't checked it out yet. And I think we're going to wrap up because otherwise I might not make it too much longer. But I thank you all so much for joining us as we test out this new form of bringing you our content from the field. And hopefully it was worth your while to tune in and you learned something. And I didn't bore you to death. And I hope if you were not available for the first stream, we will have recordings of both of these streams up. And definitely check out the first stream because Carol from Alt, who's a resident who lives in the town of Alt, and joined me for the first stream. She stole the show. I knew I was not going to even be able to compare to her on the second stream, so I didn't even try to appeal to you emotionally because what's the point? She did such a good job. But please check out that first stream because Carol did a great job of demonstrating what it is like. You know, I've just walked you through some kind of jargony technical details about pollution at this facility and this camera. If you lived right next to this facility, it's a whole different reality for you. And, you know, whether or not those flares are efficient, whether or not they're compliant with regulations, whether or not, in general, this operator is compliant with regulations, is somewhat less important than the fact that they are such an imposition on your life. Not only have they taken over this landscape, not only is there sound, as you've been tuned in, there's constant truck traffic, even with this being a producing site. You're being impacted. And someone like Carol who has had to suffer these impacts, it's a very different reality than talking about this in the abstract. A lot of us end up talking about this in the abstract. It's really important to hear from people who have to live on the front lines of oil and gas development. So please check out the first stream. You'll see that I'm not nearly as good at this as Carol is. Thank you so much for joining us today.